Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, From Womb to Grave. It's not important to know this young lady's name. However, I will tell you about her life. She was born with a condition similar to anorexia, except it encompassed the whole eye, not just the iris, effectively making her eyes look pitch black. She didn't cry. She didn't feed the doctor. Tried to find out what was wrong, but seemed to be baffled by the behavior. They sent her to another hospital, and the doctors there were just as confused as the preceding one, since she actively refused to eat anything. Fearing for her, they sent her to a world-renowned hospital to try and figure out what was wrong, even though she hadn't been eating since she was born, which was 2 weeks ago. She was in perfect health, absolutely nothing wrong with her. They decided to let her go back to her parents, since they couldn't find anything physically wrong with her besides her eyes. At home for the first time, her parents were glad to have her back. Even if she didn't eat, she still slept soundly. The first couple of years were quite peaceful, but a little disconcerting, as she said very little. As a little girl, she told her parents about the other kids. She said that one boy wanted to be an astronaut, another wanted to be a firefighter, and a girl wanted to be a princess. But, she said, I don't have any dreams. I don't have any wishes. Mommy, why? Neither the mother nor the father could answer. That same year, in fact, just a couple of days later, the teacher set them up for a meeting to talk about their little girl. He said to do anything she doesn't draw, or color, or paint, or even go outside at recess. All she does is stare at the wall. Dad turned and asked her, "Is this true?" "I have no interests." She replied this troubled them all quite deeply. When she was 10, she was made fun of for her completely black eyes. One day, a particularly cruel little boy punched her in the nose. Breaking it, he was brought into the school nurse, who after a little while had to call the hospital once the nose stopped bleeding. "Doesn't it hurt?" one doctor asked. She replied with a simple, "No." Intrigued, they wanted to transfer her to a research facility to get results, but without the parents' permission they couldn't. Soon her parents came and took her back home. The boy grew more stupid as he grew up, and as he got hit by a car playing in traffic at the age of 14. Nothing else significant happened for a while, till she was 17. She was walking home from school when a man approached her from behind and tackled her to the ground, then dragged her into a bush. She didn't say anything. He first pulled her pants down, then his. She was about to be raped. After ejaculating, he got up and walked away saying, "Hope to see you again." The next day, he had to have his penis amputated to save him from a disease that was ravaging his body. A year later, she was brought to a psychologist to find the root of her problems and fix it, no matter how long it would take. "What's it like not to feel anything?" he started. "Dead," she replied flatly, face expressionless. "Oh, then why are you here?" "To simply exist." "I can see where this is going. Let's try something else." He pulled out a set of pictures, then randomly picked two and asked which one she thought was prettier. She said, "I don't know." After a few weeks of this, he had to drop her. "I'm not getting anywhere with her," he explained to her parents. He also said that she appeared to have no preferences, opinions, interests, hopes, wishes, dreams, nor anything else of that nature. She jumped around from one psychologist to another for 6 years. Not only could they not find what was wrong with her, she didn't change in the slightest. Her parents were so desperate that they even forced her into drugs, both over the counter and illegal. All that did was make her yearn and breath addictive to others. Finally, her parents just gave up and accepted that their daughter was incurable of whatever she had. Just a year later, there was a fire. It was late at night, and the parents were sleeping when they smelled smoke. They jumped out of bed and, did you know, it wasn't hot, so they ran out to the hall and into the living room, where they were horrified to see their daughter burning. She sat on the couch with flames enveloping her body, and as her father went to get the fire extinguisher, she turned her head to look at her mother. For the first time, her expression changed. Her lips curved upwards and her eyes became wide. The fire extinguisher did nothing as she mouthed the word goodbye, and soon became nothing but a pile of ashes. At the funeral, her ashes were spread across the ocean, and the parents kept the teeth that survived. They were the only things that remained. In the news, they mentioned that species of sea life were cropping up all over the world, some previously believed to be extinct, others endangered, and yet others completely new. They didn't know how to explain it. All they knew was that it happened. Just a few days later, the mother gave birth to a baby boy. She was 63 and hadn't even known she was pregnant. They were completely taken by surprise, but happy. He appeared to be completely normal as he giggled when she tickled him, cried when he wanted something, threw tantrums and everything else that an infant or toddler does. He eventually grew up to be a perfectly healthy boy, then a man, and soon he himself became a perfectly good father. They never did tell him about his sister. The second story. It's routine. I would wake up in the morning, take a shower, have my breakfast, get dressed, and get ready for work. I would then drive to work, do whatever I needed to do, come back, watch some TV, do things around the house, get ready for bed, and go to sleep. This was how my day was like. This was how every day was like. I thought this was how everybody lived. But apparently this was not the case. My name was Man. But we were told not to change our routine for any reason. If we did, they told us that something quite unpleasant would happen. The sun rarely came out. But this was one of those times where there were neither clouds nor smog and it was visible over the wall. It made me slightly happier, and I smiled as I drove to work. I drove the same route every day, passing buildings that looked oh so similar to each other. It put me into a trance and I arrived feeling rather refreshed. I didn't even know what a day was until someone told me that it was the same thing as what we'd call a revolution. The cycle of day and night. We would also use fractions in place of time. It took me a while to get used to the concept of it all. I want to know more, so much more, but they hid much from us and it may not be possible to learn all that I want to know. I had a job at the office at one time. It was very tedious work. I think it had to do with statistics of some kind, something about dying. Anyways, it was about 8 hours of work, and I'd be 45 minutes through when friend asks how I'm doing, and I would answer back that I'm doing fine. He then proceeds to talk about his family, how they are doing, what they're doing, and so on. He would end the discussion, and we would then get back to work. Now that I think about it, it's almost like we were doing rehearsal over and over. I don't know how I lived through it all. He had to do this every day since it was part of the routine. On my 2649th day at work, yes, I count them, He informs me that co-worker hasn't been in for the last couple of days. It was considered quite worrisome. Friend told me that they might have discovered co-worker stumbling on a forbidden word, or at least that's what he thought. He thinks that they might be disciplining him. Friend whispers that he knows that co-worker found a forbidden word since friend walked by co-worker's cubicle and heard him mumbling what sounded like to friend was the word vacation. Nobody knew what it meant, and nobody really cared except for me. I was intrigued by the word, and it soon sparked an intense feeling of curiosity within me. It was like an empty bag in the water. You could push it down all you want, but it would keep coming back up. It would continually surface. You just couldn't get rid of it. It dominated my mind for the rest of the day, and eventually I gave in. I looked everywhere I could, but I didn't come up with anything. So the next day I asked friend what site co-worker was on when he discovered this word. He replied that he didn't know, and that really he didn't want to know, as it only led to trouble. Why? I had asked. He put his mouth to my ear and whispered that they track our movements, and that revealing what they do could lead to extreme punishments. They could be watching us right now, he said, sounding quite worried. I was puzzled as to how he knew this, so I simply whispered, "How?" But he ignored the question and went on in normal conversation, and I just went along with it. When I had gotten home, it felt different. I didn't know how to describe it then. It just felt darker, if I could even say that. But I wanted to continue my search for the meaning of vacation, so I did. A while later, I thought I heard something, but had thought nothing of it. A short time after that I heard something else, so I went to check it out. But I couldn't find anything unusual before I got back to my search, though. I heard what I thought was a whisper. I really didn't know what to think at the time. I looked around to try and find out where it was coming from, but still nothing. I felt uncomfortable at this point. Then I suddenly heard another whisper, but this time it didn't stop. Others seemed to join it at first. I couldn't hear what they were saying. They were indiscernible. They were a medley of voices. As they got louder, however, the words they said became clearer, and they transformed into voices. I heard a how do they every once in a while. I was just in complete wonderment and shock at this. I suddenly realized that there was no outside causes for this, but instead came from the inside of my head. I was still in total as the words became clear enough to form questions. I finally managed to focus on what they were saying. Most of them just asked, "What are you doing?" and "What are you searching for?" But one question stuck out. "What is the purpose of doing what you're doing? Can you hear me?" I asked back, and they responded with an appropriate answer. Again, "What is the purpose of doing what you're doing?" was asked. I replied that I was looking at different locations so I could learn more about the outside world. They asked, "Isn't TV enough?" I simply said, "No." They told me that what I was doing was wrong for two reasons. First, it was outside of my routine, and second, out of bounds research was prohibited. I agreed, and with that, the voices gradually disappeared until there was only silence. Despite the warning, I continued on, and with feverish delight, I finally found that vacation means to take a day off work and relax. I was quite surprised from it, and it got me thinking about it. I was still thinking about it as I dozed off in bed. I awoke with a start and managed to get to work on time despite oversleeping. After a while, I found that I was getting bored, and it left me time for thought. It suddenly occurred to me that a vacation meant I didn't have to do what they told me. that I didn't have to be bored, that I could do what I wanted to. But I was still put in my place when boss came out to shake me awake and give me a stern talking to and said that I cannot fall asleep, nor should I stop working at any time. My burning curiosity was still going strong as I came home, and I started to wonder what I should do. It didn't feel right just alienating everyone I knew. Besides, if I was to be caught, who knows what they would have done to me. The indecisiveness really affected me for the next week. I ended up getting dehydrated at work because I would sweat so much. I couldn't sit still, got headaches, nausea, stomach pains, the works. I finally couldn't take living like this anymore. I decided to leave, and through my eyes, the advantages far outweighed the disadvantages. That night I packed my bags and left the house. I felt incredibly relieved at the thought of leaving this place. I stuffed the vehicle and drove off the parking space and immediately made a wrong turn. This alerted them and they soon took action. While I drove, an image abruptly went through my mind, that of a man holding his leg in pain. Then, before I could contemplate what I was seeing, it disappeared, and it was replaced by another image of that of someone vomiting, and I felt myself gagging. It goes on like this for a while. Eventually, I have to stop driving and pull over. The images eventually disappeared. I felt dizzy, and soon I was back on the road. I thought that was it, but suddenly, I got hit with a second wave of images, but more intense than before. I saw images of falling, death, and blood this time, accompanied by their sounds, and for the first time I truly felt my emotions were coming out. I wasn't feeling cautious or anxious or any of those things. I felt the first strong emotion. I felt frightened, sweating and breathing really heavily, teeth clenching, even wanting to cry, and yet I continued to drive because I had to. Finally, the second wave was gone. I started to relax after a short while, but I saw a police vehicle coming up behind me, and I had to pull over. He pulled up behind me and got out of his vehicle. He walked up to my window and asked, "What are you doing after curfew? And why are you in unfamiliar territory?" I didn't have an answer for him. Suddenly he started laughing, and for a split second, he changed. The eyes were incredibly small and beady, almost impossible to see out of them. They also became farther apart, almost like a comedian's, and his mouth, it almost spread from ear to ear, stuck in a ghastly smile. Everything else on his head seemed to melt off, ears, nose, hair, and before I realized what I was looking at, he was back to normal. He tried to arrest me, but in my state I must have hit harder than I thought, because he was laying on the ground unconscious before me. I raced back to my car and sped off, knowing full well now that I had to escape. I remember a friend telling me how a co-worker was caught and was sent to a facility to be disciplined. I realized I didn't want to be under full control like the others. I no longer wished to live the life I lived. I wanted something different. I was getting away with escape, and I smiled at the thought of it. I was getting excited about it. Then the third wave came. This time, it was much worse, and accompanying the visuals and sounds was a warning. The voice said in a monotone that these are the things I will encounter in the outside world if I go through with what I'm doing. Viscera, limbs, insects crawling out of wounds, absorption, rolling heads, screaming, the spurting of blood. These are the things I saw, and I broke down crying. I heard sirens, and I saw that they had sent policemen after me. I wiped the tears away so I could concentrate on the road, but they still kept coming then without warning. I vomited and I nearly lost control, and yet the images still kept coming, trying to get me to come to my senses. The police were gaining ground on me, and I sped up even faster with either side of the street, just becoming a blur. The wall was coming up. It's much weaker than the door. I put the pedal to the floor and ducked my head, and I heard a thunderous crash as the vehicle forced its way through to the other side. The wall was now behind me. One of the police vehicles tried to force its way through, but it only got shot back towards the others who'd up. They get out and start firing in my direction. The bullets pass through easily and trying not to be hit. I rocket away. With the city line disappearing over the horizon, a revelation came over me. I was free from my old life. For the first time I felt excited about something. I was looking forward to my new life, and I could control it myself. This I could say in my new life, that this was the best day one could ever hope to have. The third story, the flypaper notebook. This is a pretty nice city. Chicago, it's big. And because it's so big, you never see the same person twice. I sometimes curse that reality when I'm working on my latest project. Actually, it's less of a project and more of an investigation of a peculiar thing that happens in the city library. Let me explain. About 8 months ago, I'd say mid-November, I had been assigned a bit of a weird duty by my teachers. They requested that I start my research now, for a paper that I was to turn in at the beginning of the next fall semester. I'm working on my PhD in modern American anthropology at DePaul University. They wanted a paper from me to find the profile for the most average American possible, using statistics, culture, language, etc. It was an odd project, but I figured I could do it. I had the internet and the library, and I had a list of interviewees that volunteers to be questioned for the human sciences majors. Should I want to do a survey? I haven't worked on that project for weeks. Let me explain how it started. Mid-November came around, and the school library had yielded as much information as it could give, which was not enough, unfortunately. I decided to migrate all of my studies over to the much older, but much larger, city library. I packed up my laptop, wrote down the names of all of the larger reference books that I used, and began the trek to the train station to head over to the right side of town. I arrived at the library about 1,000, and as soon as I walked into the main lobby, I was marred dead by the screams and giggles of a visiting elementary school class. I tried to smile and push my way through the sea of tiny faces and brightly colored t-shirts over to the main staircase. I trekked up the stairs to about the 3rd floor before I left the staircase and headed over to the computer to look up the location of the books about which my paper was centered. Floor 9, West Wing. Great. I thought to myself sarcastically, 6 more floors to climb before I can begin. I'll be in great shape by the time I'm done with this paper. So I climbed and climbed and climbed. Finally I reached my destination and took out 4 or 5 books, fired up my computer, and began working. I worked through about 3:30 p.m. before I began to get hungry. I leaned back from my chair, stretched my arms into the air, and then pushed my glasses up my nose. It was only then that I realized that there was another person on the silent library floor along with me. A young girl, maybe 18 or 19 years old, was browsing through the books on the shelves across from me and the other work tables. I remember remarking to myself that either I was working very hard to not have noticed another human being enter the room, or she was just incredibly quiet, or more likely a mixture of the two. I thought nothing of it at the time and began packing up my things. As I was packing my things up, I noticed the girl come to a table and sit down with a peculiar-looking book. I did not see where she got it from exactly, though I just assumed one of the shelves. It did not look like a book that is printed and bound and published in mass, but more like a simple notebook with lined pages and a flimsy paperback, like you would get it off a steeple or Staples. She was reading it very intently. I could see something written on the book's front cover, but it was written in black and was hard to read against the dark blue paper cover. I decided not to intrude and continued packing, and she continued to rip through the words on the pages with her eyes. As I lifted the strap of my computer bag over my shoulder, the girl dropped the book onto the floor with a soft flapping of paper. Her eyes were fixed onto the opposite wall in a glazed over row. I looked across the room to where she was looking, but saw nothing except more bookshelves. I could tell immediately that it was something that she had read that caused her to suddenly be dumbstruck. There was no indication of anything in her eyes. They were unloving. Unresponsive, she slowly rose from her seat and silently moved across the room towards the stairs. I followed with caution and a bit of curiosity. I looked back over my shoulder and saw the small notebook still lying on the ground. I was hungry and my bag was heavy, so I did not involve myself in preserving the library's belongings and followed the girl down the stairs. Her eyes were completely dead and glazed over. She did not make a sound through all 9 floors of stairs. She walked slowly and silently, looking half focused on the stairs, and half in deep thought about whatever it was the book had revealed to her. She went out the front door of the lobby. I was still following her a few feet behind. She pushed open the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. I followed, keeping the door open, still intending to go to lunch and not have to endure any drama. Instead of walking left or right, the girl kept walking straight. She walked in between the bumpers of 2 parked cars and right out into traffic. I panicked as she walked out into the street. I quickly ran to try and grab her shoulder before she wandered into the busy street, but it was too late. A large pickup truck, horn blaring, plowed straight into her. The driver slammed on his brakes, but it was not enough. Her neck snapped left, then right, then her head slammed into the pavement. Blood splattered everywhere. The truck finally screeched to a halt. It had skidded so far that the girl's body was now just underneath the bed of the truck. The driver just sat in the driver's seat in shock, knuckles white, gripping the steering wheel, and him just staring at the splatters of blood all over the windshield. I ran over to the girl, trying to pull her out to try and see if she was alive. I was able to grab her hand. I pulled, but then realized that her arm was broken. Her elbow was shattered and her forearm and upper arm had been dislocated, and now it was just a bloody tube with fragments of bone floating around inside it and bits of gravel sticking to it. Revulsed, I bent way down and peered under the car. Her neck had been rotated and snapped. A chain was sitting on the back of her shoulder as she lay stomach down. I could very clearly see her face. Her skull had been all but completely crushed. There was blood dripping from her nose and it was pouring out of her mouth, but her eyes still had the same exact expression and glazed over, looking at nothing, staring out into space. It was a bit strange that I thought she was still alive for just a second. Just for a second. The notion that she hadn't been harmed by the accident crossed my mind. Sure, her brain was ground into the tarmac by a truck tire, and sure the blood soaked every piece of my clothing, so much that I had to throw every piece of it away. But her face had not changed the dead. I'd look that had come over her, way up on the 9th floor of the building, was still plastered onto her face. Now it was never to be removed again. I just stared at her face for a second. I stood up at the sound of sirens. The police had come and were blocking off the area where the accident had happened. I told them everything I have told you. They took notes, but did not seem particularly interested in the book. I was shaken up, really shaken up. I was no longer hungry. I decided to just go home. The library closed for the day. It was tough to sleep that night. I just wanted to go upstairs and find that book. Nothing plagued my mind more than what was in that book. That book had killed her either up on the 9th floor or down in the street. I could not positively decide which in my mind. What I had witnessed, whatever it was, had me convinced that the book was responsible for a life that day. I was both ravensly curious and deathly scared of what was in that book. If I did go up the 9th floor, should I read it? Could I even find it? Had the police taken it? Was it still sitting on the floor? Was it that girl had dropped it? These things I did not know. The library did not open for days. I've been looking for this book for over a week now. I have scoured every single shelf on the 9th, 8th, and now the 7th floor. I have asked the librarians about any such book. None had seen it. I asked all of the janitors. None had seen any book like it. I even asked a policeman who visited me to ask about anything else I had to say. He said no such book had been taken into the station for evidence. The case had been closed and deemed an accident. The driver was acquitted, seeing as how he had almost no time to stop, and probably could not have done anything anyway. I keep thinking to myself, I have to continue my research. Looking for this book is ridiculous. There is no point in it. Even if I do find it, the chances of the book being the cause of her death are slim. She must have had mental problems, or maybe it really was just an accident. Maybe it was something completely different that she had just remembered that caused her to be so distracted that she walked straight into traffic. Or perhaps the thing she remembered made her so depressed that she just had to end it. The book is unlikely to be the reason she died, right? Even with these rationalizations, there were still some things that did not add up. If the librarians didn't do anything with the book, nor the janitors, nor the police, then who? There was very little time for anyone to go up the stairs after the girl and I went down, and if someone did happen to go all the way up to the 9th floor, they would have to go over to that particular table, among dozens, to be able to find it. It was very inconspicuous after all. I think I may need to see a therapist. This thing is haunting me. I need to put it behind me. I'm not getting any work done. I think it may be happening again somehow. Someone else found the book. I think it has been 3 weeks since then. I have an office. The library lends to heavy researchers. When I found that app, I was very pleased. It is a computer, and plenty of space. There are a dozen just like this one, next to mine up here on the 5th floor. I've been getting a lot of work done with this office. It's been over a month since the incident with the girl. I was thinking about it less and less every day, until now. As I'm writing this, I'm glancing up every few seconds out of the window in the office over to a table in the library. Sitting on this table is a kid, a boy, maybe 16 or 17, is sitting there reading the book. I know that it's the exact same book. It has to be. I watched him bend down inside one of the aisles and pick it up. I know what I have to do now if he drops it, like the girl did. I grab it. I'm considering going out there right now and getting it from him, but I want to see if it puts him into a trance like the girl. He's been reading it much longer than the girl had, but just as intently. The kid dropped it. He looked up now, just as the girl had, but now he's looking right at me. I can tell. He's looking right at me. There's no mistaking it. I rose from my chair, and he hopped off the top of the table, his eyes still dead focused on me. I opened the door to my office and walked out into the library. The kid is still staring, and blinking, and in 10, they began walking towards me, but now has just walked around the table. What was in the book? I half shouted to him. His face grimaced. He began walking steadily backwards, away from me, towards the other side of the library. I began walking towards him. What was in the book? I shouted this time. He flinched and looked very annoyed. He was now grinding his teeth. WHATWSINTHEBOK. I shouted it even louder. I was now passing the table he had left the book on. I went over to grab the book, but before I could, he flipped around and started into a dead run. He ran like the hounds of hell were at his heels. I was watching him. It wasn't 5 seconds before he reached the opposite wall. There was a very large window there, running at an impressive pace. He dove through the window, the glass shattered, and he fell out. I screamed. I didn't know what to do. It was the second time this had happened. I ran over to the broken window without the book. I looked down. There, the boy was face down. In a parking space, his legs were twisted into horrific positions. His body was 5 floors down, but I could still see that he was alive. For the time being he was moving, but bleeding badly. He must have been in extreme pain. He was squirming, and both of his legs were broken. Perhaps one of his arms were too. I couldn't tell. I went back to that table. The book was not there. I smashed my hand onto the table in frustration and sadness. I sat down in a chair, and I gazed into my office and thought, until the police came to question me again. They did the same, cops. I told them what I have told you. They seemed not to believe me very much this time. There were witnesses for the first accident, but not for this one. There are no surveillance cameras in libraries. There was a law a few years back banning them. They did not want the government monitoring what its people were reading. They could not honestly believe that a kid just jumped out of a window because of this same book. I couldn't blame them either. It boggled my mind for months. It still is, as I sit here in Holding at the State House. I am on trial for the death of this kid. I'm currently waiting for the physiologist to come to give me an evaluation. The physiologist came in, sat down, and put his briefcase on the table. Good afternoon, Mr. Baker. Afternoon. I've been quite anxious to speak with you. I've studied your case quite thoroughly. He spoke very kindly. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you claim that both the boy who fell out of the window and the girl who was hit by the car a few months ago, both of whom you were near when they died, were reading some sort of notebook when they died. Yes, I explained for the 1000th time since I had been there. Describe this notebook to me, he said as he opened up his briefcase. Well, a small, thin, has a dark blue paper cover, and it has something written on th. The doctor had removed a few of his papers, and sitting there in his briefcase was the notebook. The very same notebook. Yes, he said as he gazed at me in curiosity. He saw that I was looking at the notebook, wide-eyed and apprehensive. He saw it too. And what is this? He held it up and opened it. I could see that on the front was written the word F-L-Y-P-A-P-E-R. I began to breathe very heavily. I pushed my chair away from the examination room table. I sat there, against the wall, looking only at that notebook, which had plagued my thoughts and killed people already. The doctor read the book intently for about a minute. Slowly he rose from his chair without saying a word, and without an expression on his face. I could see only a single tear running down his face. He turned around and opened the door to the room. Just outside the door was an officer who was guarding the room. The doctor reached down, slipped the gun out of the officer's holster, put it in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Blood showered over my entire body. I didn't even notice it. There was the book still sitting on the table. I panicked. I grabbed the book and ran for it. I hopped over the doctor's body and spun around the cop like an Olympian. I sprinted down the hallway and found an open janitor's closet. I ran in, shut the door, and flipped on the light. There I was with the book. I opened it, and then bam! A cop had opened the door and smacked me in the back of the head with a nightstick. I blacked out. I woke up in a hospital, cuffed to my bed, still covered in blood. The cops testified to the fact that the doctor had killed himself and not me. I told them about the book, and how I was in the closet to read it. The cop hit me to keep me from escaping. They searched. They said there was no book in the closet. Here I sit, in this cell. Here I will sit for 2.5 years, for the unintentional manslaughter of 3 people. With antipsychosis medication, no, I am not in prison, but in an institution. The handlers here do not treat many people well, including me. I tell them all day, every day, that I am not crazy. They beat some people, they force feed some people, they completely neglect some people. They have to force me to take my medication every day. I found the notebook in my cell. I have not read it. 2 of the most horrible handlers have found the notebook as well. I gave it to them. They no longer bother me, nor neglect any of the other patients. Every day I think about the book. It always feels like it's just daring me to read it. I always feel the temptation. I'm always curious about what's written in the book. What's in the book? The notebook always finds its way back to me. I know better than to read it. I know better. I've seen what happens when one reads the book, but I just want to know. I just want to know what it says. I just want to know.